Today you'll need your calculator, but no unit circle. So we're going to solve equations exactly the same thing as we did yesterday, except you won't be able to look at the unit circle to get the values. You'll have to look at the calculator to get the values. So we want to think of our reference angle as a positive acute angle. So that means it lives in the first quadrant. So I'm going to call that theta. If you're in quadrant 2, to get the angle from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, and let's say you're in degrees, you would do 180 minus theta. If you're in radians, you're going to have to do pi minus theta, and we have a key for that. So on your calculator, I would suggest you use the pi key. In the third quadrant, we have to do 180 degrees plus theta, and of course, in radians, that's pi plus theta. And you have to actually use pi, the 3.14. And then in the fourth quadrant, this is 360 minus theta if you're in degrees, and of course then 2 pi minus theta if you're in radians. So you'll have to pay attention to your calculator, and you'll have to go to the mode and make sure you're in the correct mode. How will you know what mode to be in? Well, you're going to read the directions. And here the directions tell you 0 to 360, which means go to mode on your calculator and make sure that the mode button, are in degrees. You have to go to mode in order to see it. It doesn't show up on the screen. So we still want it to be word equals number. So we're going to move this 4 over here, get these numbers together. So 5 sine theta equals 3, and divide, of course, by 5. Now, the sine of an angle being 3/5, that's not on the unit circle. That's how you know that you'll need the calculator. Plus the directions, nearest tenth. So in the calculator, since you're looking for an angle, you're going to have to do second sine and then 3 divided by 5. You don't need to use the fraction key. You don't need to do anything fancy. And we get 36.9 degrees. Well, then we have to also move this angle so that we find the other place where sine is positive, which is in the second quadrant. So then you do 180 minus 36.9, and the other angle is 143.1 degrees. Still in degrees, let's try this one. Cotangent of theta, of course we're going to add the 2, equals -5. Now with your reciprocal functions, we're going to think of this as 1 over cotangent, and then of course 1 over -5. Well, don't do 1 divided by cotangent in your calculator. You can, but it seems dumb when there really is just a tangent key. It's much faster and easier if you just do tangent equals -1/5. So again, we're looking for an angle. So you're going to do second tangent negative, not minus, -1/5. All right, so in this one, out of the calculator, it gives you -11.3 degrees. We don't want this. The directions tell you 0 is the lowest number you can have. But what's nice is, if you think about how we do this, -11.3 is okay to just call it +11.3 and put that thing in the first quadrant. This is really where we want it. We want it in the first quadrant. It's much easier to use. Now the problem is, tangent isn't negative there. Tangent's negative here and here. So this is why that little chart up at the top is important. We're going to have to do 180 minus 11.3 and 360 minus 11.3. Now you don't have to write that down. I'm just writing it down to show you how we're going to calculate our angle measures. So we get 168.7, and then in the fourth quadrant, it's 348.7. And those are the two angle measures. So just because your calculator gives you the answer does not mean that's the answer you want. You're going to use that answer, but does not mean you're going to write that answer down necessarily. So be careful. Don't just say, well, my calculator gave me this. Yes, that's probably very true, but doesn't make it correct. All right, so now we switch to radians. And you know this, again, because the directions tell you. Now, this changes too. Nearest thousandth, that's 3 decimal places. This is because radians, and let's just take a minute. Let's just take a little time out here on the radians. Oh, that's extreme. Sorry. For the radians, you're very good at degrees. This is still 0, but this is pi. This is 3.14. So there's only 3 and a little bit more radians in half of a circle. Radians are very, very large. or degrees are very, very small, depending on how you look at it. Halfway between 0 and 3.14 is 1.57. So anything between 0 and 1.57 is in this first quadrant. And then, of course, if we go down here, 3 pi over 2 is the same thing as 4.71. And then all the way around, of course, is 2 pi, which is 6.28. So our answers are all going to be less than 6.28. So it's hard to tell the difference between an angle if it's 1.8 and 1.8. So that's why we go to a little bit further decimal, so you can definitely tell which one's larger and which one's smaller. So again, put your calculator in radians. So go to mode, put it in radians, and now we're going to do some algebra here, and then we'll get to the trig. So cosine squared x is equal to 1/16. And of course, to solve that, we take the square root. And when you take the square root of something, you get the positive and the negative value. I would just put the positive value in the calculator. It's the easiest one to work with. And we get from the calculator second cosine, 1 divided by 4. You get 1.318. Well, you got to remember, that's here. So now we have to do pi minus 1.318. So on your calculator on the far right, underneath the arrow buttons, there's the clear button. And underneath that, it's that little caret button for your power. And right there is where pi is. And I would use that key rather than put in 3.14. It's less buttons, first of all. And 3.14 is not to 3 decimal places. So it's going to be a little bit inaccurate. If you use the pi key, it'll be the most accurate answer we could get. So pi minus 1.318 is 1.824. Now we have to do pi plus 1.318. And again, you don't have to write this out. I'm just writing it down since I can't show you on the calculator. And then we're going to do 2 pi minus 1.318. And that will give us 4.965. So while these angles seem all very close together and very small, they're really not, because they're all in different quadrants. They're all, just look in radians, and this looks different. So one more time, and let's do one that's a reciprocal function. It's no different if you're in degrees or radians. The only difference is you make sure you change your calculator to radians. Now with this is the cosecant of x is equal to -9/6. You don't have to reduce that fraction. You're going to put it in the calculator. Calculator doesn't care if it's reduced. So when we go to flip this over, right, the reciprocal of cosecant is sine. Do not write 1 over cosecant. You're wasting your time. And then just flip this over. Don't do 1 over, don't do all that. It's not necessary. Just get right to it. So -6/9. So we do second sine -6/9, and it gives you -0.730. Not what you want, but we do want the 0.730. So the question here is, where is the cosine negative? Now the cosine is negative at -7.30, but that's the wrong name, because if you go back to the directions, 0 is the smallest number you're allowed to have, no negative numbers. So we're going to put this thing in these two quadrants. So we're going to do pi plus 0.730, which is 3.872, and 2 pi minus 0.730, which is 5. Sorry, it looks like a negative sign. It's not supposed to be. So this is going to be 5.553. So try that on your calculator. If you're not able to get those values, you got to let me know, and I'll help you with your calculator. So try the problems on the back, and bring any questions you have to class.